Disarm suspicion and to convince them he had truly become one of their number, he cooperated in giving efficiency to their hostile designs against all he held most dear in the world. It had now become a matter of infinite moment that he should immediately escape, and carry to his friends in the fort the tidings of their peril. But the slightest unwary movement would have led the suspicious Indians so to redouble their vigilance as to render escape utterly impossible. So skilfully did he conceal the emotions which agitated him, and so successfully did he feign entire contentment with his lot, that his captors, all absorbed in the enterprise in which they were engaged, remitted their ordinary vigilance. On the morning of the 16th of June, Boone rose very early to take his usual hunt. With his secreted ammunition and the amount allowed him by the Indians for the day, he hoped to be able to save himself from starvation during his flight of 5 days through the pathless wilderness. There was a distance of 160 miles between Old Chilicothe and Boonesborough. The moment his flight should be suspected, 450 Indian warriors, breathing vengeance, and in perfect preparation for the pursuit, would be on his track. His capture would almost certainly result in his death by the most cruel tortures, for the infuriated Indians would wreak upon him all their vengeance. It is, however, not probable that this silent, pensive man allowed these thoughts seriously to disturb his equanimity. An instinctive trust in God seemed to inspire him. He was 43 years of age. In the knowledge of woodcraft, and in powers of endurance, no Indian surpassed him. Though he would be pursued by sagacious and veteran warriors, and by young Indian braves, a pack of 450 savages following with keener scent than that of the bloodhound, one poor victim, yet undismayed, he entered upon the appalling enterprise. The history of the world perhaps presents but few feats so difficult and yet so successfully performed, and yet the only record which this modest man makes in his autobiography of this wonderful adventure is as follows: On the 16th, before sunrise, I departed in the most secret manner, and arrived at Boonesborough on the 20th, after a journey of 160 miles, during which I had but one meal. It was necessary, as soon as Boone got out of sight of the village, to fly with the utmost speed, to put as great a distance as possible between himself and his pursuers, before they should suspect his attempt at escape. He subsequently learned that as soon as the Indians apprehended that he had actually fled, there was the most intense commotion in their camp, and immediately a large number of their fleetest runners and keenest hunters were put upon his trail. He dared not fire a gun. Had he killed any game, he could not have ventured to kindle a fire to cook it. He had secretly provided himself with a few cuts of dried venison, with which he could appease his hunger as he pressed forward by day and by night, scarcely allowing himself one moment for rest or sleep. His route lay through forests and swamps, and across many streams swollen by recent rains. At length he reached the Ohio River. Its current was swift and turbid, rolling in a majestic flood half a mile in width, filling the bed of the stream with almost fathomless waters from shore to shore. Experienced as Colonel Boone was in woodcraft, he was not a skillful swimmer. The thought of how he should cross the Ohio had caused him much anxiety. Upon reaching its banks, he fortunately, may we not say providentially, found an old canoe, which had drifted among the bushes upon the shore. There was a large hole at one end, and it was nearly filled with water. He succeeded in bailing out the water and plugging up the hole, and crossed the river in safety. Then for the first time he so far indulged in a feeling of security as to venture to shoot a turkey, and kindling a fire, he feasted abundantly upon the rich repast. It was the only meal in which he indulged during his flight of 5 days. On his arrival at Boonesborough, he was welcomed as one risen from the grave. Much to his disappointment, he found that his wife with his children, despairing of ever seeing him again, had left the fort and returned to the house of her father in North Carolina. She supposed that the Indians had killed him. "Oppressed," writes Boone, "with the distresses of the country, and bereaved of me, her only happiness, she had undertaken her long and perilous journey through the wilderness. It is gratifying to record that she reached her friends in safety." Boone found the fort, as he had apprehended, in a bad state of defense. His presence, his military skill, and the intelligence he brought, immediately inspired every man to the intensest exertion. The gates were strengthened, new bastions were formed, and provisions were laid in to stand a siege. Everything was done which could be done to repel an assault from they knew not how many savages, aided by British leaders, from the band of old Chillicothe was to be joined by warriors from several other tribes. In 10 days Boonesborough was ready for the onset. These arduous labors being completed, Boone heroically resolved to strike consternation into the Indians, by showing them that he was prepared for aggressive as well as defensive warfare, and that they must leave behind them warriors for the protection of their own villages. Selecting a small party of but 19 men, about the 1st of August he emerged from Boonesborough, marched boldly to the Ohio, crossed the river, entered the valley of Scioto, and was within 4 miles of an Indian town, Paint Creek, which he intended to destroy, when he chanced to encounter a band of 30 savages, painted, thoroughly armed, and on the war path, to join the band advancing from Old Chillicothe. The Indians were attacked with such vehemence by Boone that they fled in consternation, leaving behind them 3 horses and all their baggage. The savages also lost 1 killed and 2 wounded, while they inflicted no loss whatever upon the white men. Boone sent forward some swift runners as spies, and they speedily returned with the report that the Indians in a panic had entirely abandoned Paint Creek. Aware that the warriors would rush to join the 450 from Old Chillicothe, and that they might cut off his retreat, or reach Boonesborough before his return, he immediately commenced a rapid movement back to the fort. Every man would be needed there for an obstinate defense. This foray had extended 150 miles from the fort. It greatly alarmed the Indians. It emboldened the hearts of the garrison, and gave them intelligence of the approach of their foes. After an absence of but 7 days, Boone with his heroic little band quite triumphantly re-entered the fort. The approach of the foe is described in the following terms by Boone: "On the 8th of August the Indian army arrived, being 444 in number, commanded by Captain Duquesne, 11 other Frenchmen, and some of their own chiefs, and marched up in view of our fort, with British and French colors flying. And having sent a summons to me in his Britannic Majesty's name to surrender the fort, I requested 2 days' consideration, which was granted. It was now a critical period with us. We were a small number in the garrison, a powerful army before our walls, whose appearance proclaimed inevitable death, fearfully painted, and marking their footsteps with desolation. Death was preferable to captivity, and if taken by storm, we must inevitably be devoted to destruction. In this situation we concluded to maintain our garrison if possible. We immediately proceeded to collect what we could of our horses and other cattle, and bring them through the posterns into the fort, and in the evening of the 9th, I returned the answer that we were determined to defend our fort while a man was living. Now, said I to their commander, who stood attentively hearing my sentiments, we laugh at your formidable preparations, but thank you for giving us notice, and time for our defense. Your efforts will not prevail, for our gates shall forever deny you admittance. Whether this answer affected their courage or not, I cannot tell, but contrary to our expectations, they formed a scheme to deceive us, declaring it was their orders from Governor Hamilton to take us captives, and not to destroy us. But if 9 of us would come out and treat with them, they would immediately withdraw their forces from our walls, and return home peaceably. This sounded grateful in our ears, and we agreed to the proposal." Chapter 9.